I'm Hindul Gupta. This has been my guest today is Bhawani Shekhawat. Bhavani has a very interesting job, actually. Until recently, he was in charge of the UK operations of Akshaya Patra, the world's biggest midday meal program, serving billions of meals. I believe they just served their fourth billion meals. 4 billion meals is no joke. And today I asked Bhavani to talk to me about one specific thing. We think of hunger as a particularly global south kind of problem, and yet Akshay Patra and its experience shows that even in the developed world there is a problem of hunger, especially in certain parts of the year. And this is something that Bhavani worked very closely to try and fix in the UK with Akshay Patra. Bhavani, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you, Hindul. What a pleasure it is to be here. Thank you.
I want to start by talking a little bit about this hunger in the developed world, because a lot of people don't think of, hunger as a problem that could occur in the developed world. They think of hunger only as something from the global south. Talk to me a little bit about your experience in the UK and what you found.
Right, Hindul. Perhaps it makes a little bit more sense in today's context to nuance hunger. Hunger as it was, let's say 20 or 30 years ago, is very different from what hunger is today. And therefore, to me, hunger is a proxy of many things. Obviously, it manifests as hunger, but it truly manifests in far more devious and far more vicious ways around the world. For example, malnutrition, obesity, poor nutrition, neglecting children between the age of 6 and 16. In other words, they're subcontracted in ways that actually defeats the very purpose of mental, physical, and spiritual growth. So what we're seeing around the world is a strange phenomenon. We are seeing some countries still experiencing acute hunger, where children just don't have enough to eat. And in many places, we see occasional hunger, sporadic hunger. For example, in England, we have this terrible issue of children not receiving food when school is out, although they receive a free school meal when school is in play. But during school holidays and weekends, because parents are working, and we're seeing a far higher incidence of poverty in certain demographics today than ever before. So we are seeing situational hunger. And as a result, we are seeing poor malnutrition everywhere. The second thing which really struck me as I was delving deeper into this, particularly in the West, is we've always believed that hunger or malnutrition equates to stunting and wasting. In other words, if you've solved for 0 to 3 or perhaps 0 to 6 sort of hunger malnutrition, the child will then be resilient enough to get on with their lives, which is not the case anymore. So we have seen a terrible incidence of not just malnutrition, but exceptionally damaging food between the age of 6 and 16. So hunger takes on many forms. And in the UK, it's evidenced in all of these forms. So we saw families that just weren't eating, and we saw families that were eating very, very poorly. In fact, we saw very few families that were eating well enough to create a child population that would serve the country well in the future.
That's fascinating, because this is not something that most people would think of when you think of the UK. The idea of the UK always is of, plentiful food, clean food, cleaner, for instance, and less, chemically induced, for instance, than America. But you are obviously giving a very interesting perspective. Akshay Patra, of course, is, in a sense, devotional food. It is inspired by the legacy of Srila Prabhupada, the founder of ISKCON. And Akshay Patra serves pure vegetarian food, particularly of a nutritious kind. Talk to me a little bit about the intervention you were able to make in the hunger that you saw in the UK with the kind of food that you could bring with Akshay Patra.
So when we were trying to unravel the problem, and the problem really revealed to us, and me in particular, in the strangest of manners, one day a report landed in my desk which said nearly 1.2, 1.3 million children were going hungry in the UK. And this was an all-party parliamentary group report. So it wasn't necessarily propaganda or perhaps research done by an independent think tank. It was an all-party parliamentary group report. And when I read the report, my eyes popped out. And we didn't dismiss it. We said, let's dive deeper into it. So we then collaborated with some of the finest organizations, research organizations in the country, including the London Business School, and studied this for a year. And we found three things. We found that children like tasty food. It is not about vegetarian or non-vegetarian food. They like food that is prepared with love, served with love, and serves a contextual purpose. The second thing that we realized is food was not fit for the context it was meant to serve. In other words, we all know this, that food serves a particular purpose. If you are recovering from an illness, you eat differently. If you are convalescing, you eat differently. If you're a senior, you eat differently. So why would you eat differently when you're in the classroom? That was a big question. So why were children eating food that was very high in salt, exceptionally high in sugar and saturated fats, although clean and hot, but it wasn't serving the purpose of truly firing the body and the mind? And the third thing was the sheer lack of availability of it when required by children who definitely needed it. So that was the learning. And we realized that vegetarian food is a denominator that serves everyone. So you don't have the problem of halal, you don't have the problem of kosher. Secondly, we could truly make vegetarian foods tasty. And I think that's really where the Indian heritage comes in. So we didn't have to serve Indian food. We created, fantastic recipes and worked with some of the finest chefs in the country to create a shepherd's pie, to create a lasagna, to create, a plate of food that was great to look, delicious to eat, and served with love.
You were talking about holiday hunger. This is something that would not be understood in many parts of the world. Could you conceptually explain what this is and why this was such a problem? And the other thing you mentioned is that even when families were eating, they were perhaps not eating well. Now, again, this is not something that a lot of people think of when they think of the UK. Could you explain to us what this was, what this problem really was, and how did you, how were you able to tap into communities to serve them better so that these problems could be resolved?
Right. So holiday hunger literally is hunger during the school holidays. In the UK, you had to qualify to receive a free school meal. In other words, until recently, I believe there's an announcement now, but until recently, children had to qualify. They were means tested. And that was always a problem with me at a personal level. Why should children be means tested to receive food that they deserve, need, and require? If you are unwell in the UK, you go to a hospital, you're not means tested. If you mess up, get into trouble, and you are taken in by the authorities, you're not means tested. So why is a child means tested whilst at school? So means testing created a system where some children could buy food, some people could bring food, and some people were meant to receive it in the classroom. But it was only available when school was running. And for a large number of days, school is out in the UK. So when children cannot go to school, then they do not receive a meal. They at least skip one meal, if not two. So that phenomena is holiday hunger. There are a very large number of children who were entitled to free school meals, weren't able, or their families weren't able to procure 3 meals for them during school holidays. And in the UK, unlike India, schools run 5 days a week. So there was a weekend problem as well.
And how did Akshaya Patra make an intervention to fill that gap?
Two things.
What did you actually do? Take us through the logistics of what you did.
Right. The first thing is, as we scoped the problem, we realized that there wasn't a system available to serve these children with speed, at scale, and with the appropriate nutrition. So there were catering services available. A very large number of well-meaning and kind-hearted people were doing what they could. Someone was cooking for 5 people, 5 children, someone's cooking 50, someone was cooking for 100 maybe. We quickly realized that when 5 people serve 50, the 5 feel a lot better about it than the 50. And we thought of a possibility where a few people a kitchen, an Akshaya Patra kitchen. As you know, Akshaya Patra is very proficient in the way it uses capital and revenue resources. And kitchen becomes the centerpiece of that deployment. So we said if we could build a kitchen that would serve a very large number of children delicious, hot, freshly prepared meals. And to that purpose, we started scouting for support. We didn't receive much. But then we came across this outstanding organization called GMSP, God My Silent Partner, run by Mr. Ramesh Sachdev and his family, and Sonal, who is the CEO. They really liked the idea of making an impact. So we started thinking of, could we possibly have a kitchen in Greater London that would have a capacity of 3,000 meals per shift and would make an impact. So we started building that, and COVID happened. We didn't stop. So we built the kitchen right at the height of COVID, because then we realized that there was also an opportunity to serve other constituents, not just children. But as you know, during COVID, there was a bit of a catastrophe when it came to food as well. And then as things subsided, schools started to reopen. Fortunately, there was a big outcry. When I say fortunately, it was providential in the UK around holiday hunger. So people like Marcus Rashford and certain celebrities started to talk about it, and it became a fairly heightened issue. And therefore, we could then approach the local councils and local authorities to say, hello, you run holiday clubs where these children come during school holidays and are looked after. Someone's teaching them a few skills, they're playing a few games, and so on and so forth, but there is no meal provision. Why don't we provide the meal during these holiday clubs on site to all the children who come to attend those holiday clubs? So we then collaborated with a large number of local councils to make that happen.
Talk to us a little bit about, you also mentioned that, a lot of families, even if they're eating, they're not eating well. As I said, this is, again, something most people don't think of when they think of the UK. Why do you think this is prevalent, and why do you think so many families, from your experience, are not eating adequately in the UK? And how did Akshaya Patra make an intervention there?
So clearly we live in a world, Hindol, where there is no such thing as a straitjacketed first world and a straitjacketed third world. There is enough of the first in the third, and the third in the first. So we have accentuated poverty in large parts of the UK. In other words, you could be working full-time, 40 hours a week, and be in poverty in the UK, because the minimum wages are 10 odd pounds, you earn 400 pounds a week, and that's really not enough to support a family. So part of the reason for hunger is accentuated poverty in certain sections of the society, particularly at the bottom of the pyramid. The other part is food inflation. In the last 3 years, we've seen inflation of the worst kind in the UK. At one point in time, food inflation was in high double digits. So this double whammy of very high food inflation and relatively poorer real incomes created a challenge of food poverty. And therefore, a lot of these families ended up relying on what we call food banks in the UK, which are nothing but real collectives of people who then put out surplus food run by a community organization, and people who need that food come to these food banks and take away a trolley or a packet. But when we audited these food banks, we realized some were really, really good. In other words, they were careful about qualities, quantities, and sell-by dates, etc., etc. Some were just doing the very best they could. So there wasn't really a system that could provide nourishment and nutrition, that would solve for nourishment and nutrition, that the bottom of the pyramid were relying on.
Now talk to us a little bit about the adventure of serving, this kind of beautiful vegetarian meals in the UK. You spoke about building a kitchen. I actually had the good fortune of visiting that kitchen, and thank you for the wonderful meal that you all served me there. But talk to us a little bit about how you built that kitchen, what kind of food got served, were there unique moments and adventurous moments that you want to share? Talk to us a little bit about how you guys went about building this.
Well, first and foremost, it was truly an adventure. I think that's the best description of it, because it was truly first of its kind. and first of its kind, not from planting a flag point of view, but from even a thought leadership point of view, that you could really create a community-based centralized kitchen that would operate on fantastic scientific principles. As you know, Akshaya Patra is a triangulation of spirituality, science, and systems. A triangulation of that and really creating magic via food. So first and foremost, it was a challenge to explain the concept, because in general, people believe, hello, these children should be receiving a free school meal from the government. Like you said, a large part of the British population couldn't get their head around holiday hunger, right? So that was interesting. The second thing was really around saying, okay, how would you meet the most exacting systems in the UK, that food has to be served at a certain temperature, the cook to consumption ratio has to be this, and the nutritional values have to be these, and so on and so forth. We realized that Akshaya Patra had far more advanced systems than what was stipulated by the authorities. So that was quite an aha moment, that we actually sign off on all of the criteria and the quality standards. And the third thing was truly, developing those menus. For example, we worked with a Michelin star chef, Alfred Prasad, who actually cooked our first few meals and served them when we launched the kitchen. Created just the most delightful pasta, and the joy on children's faces and the parents and families that enjoyed that food was just beyond description. I get very emotional talking about it. But to me, one thing stands out, and that's truly, I'll remember it for as long as I live. There's a fantastic school in Kilburn in North London, and a very large number of children in that school were, according to the school head teacher, going hungry and struggling. The families were struggling with food, and particularly post-COVID recoveries and so on and so forth, joblessness. There was a big problem. And the school principal would drive personally every day to the kitchen, pick up the meals, take them back to the school, and serve those meals to children. For me, that kind of commitment from the local community told me that we're doing something that's right, and we're doing it in a way that actually works. There were many challenges as well, Hindol. I should not discount the challenges. There were many other challenges as well, but these were some of the aha moments.
Also, tell us on a lighter vein, how did you manage to get the recipes right? How did you procure the recipes? How did you manage to get the recipes absolutely right? You spoke about a Michelin star chef who prepared the first, batches of pasta, but subsequently, how did you get the recipes right?
We did three things. We continued to work with these chefs. We got school chefs involved, including organizations that really try to solve for this problem with speed and at scale. But then we involve families and parents as well. So every time we would do recipe innovation, we would invite children, we would invite their parents, and we would invite local authorities to truly come and sample the food, not just in the way it was consumed, but also experience how it was cooked and what it truly meant for us to do that. And that was quite interesting for them to be involved in recipe development. For example, we had the parents and families saying, your shepherd's pie just cannot be vegetarian. I want to see it. I want to see how you can make the most delicious shepherd's pie, which is 100% vegetarian. And she came to the kitchen and she was totally blown over. And many of those parents wanted the recipes, and we tried to create a system where we could also help them with simple cooking techniques. We also launched something called Happiness Box. So families said, look, you're doing so much. Now, don't worry about cooking this food. If you could give us a box that is all the ingredients and perhaps even a recipe for us to be able to cook it. We've got stuff in the pantry. So we've got some oil, we've got some spices, but maybe if your biryani needs a particular spice, then please send it along. And we didn't call them food parcels, we call them happiness boxes. And those happiness boxes were delivered to families, and only to realize that what was actually the budget for a child could serve an entire family for an extended weekend, let's say the Easter weekend or an extended bank holiday. So it's quite interesting to get them involved and truly take their input in developing those recipes.
As we come to the end of our conversation, I have one or two last questions for you, Bhavani. Going back to the theme where I began, a lot of people don't understand how complicated problems like hunger are, even in the developed world. And this seems to be in many pockets becoming worse. Talk to us a little bit about your experience from the UK, because again, a lot of people don't understand, how communities face these issues, how it impacts them, what is the long term impact. So what in your opinion, for instance, was a long term impact of hunger, say in a family in the UK, consistently facing, for instance, a child facing holiday hunger year after year, for just as an example, right? What would be the impact, long term impact?
Right. You see, there's a lot of data. There is a lot of information, very few insights, and perhaps even lesser knowledge and wisdom, and perhaps even very, very limited action. There is enough data. Imperial College in London has created a monograph which has actually mapped school meals around the world and tried to really highlight the genuine problem of malnutrition or poor nutrition. And for me, the learning from that document and many other people that I met in London, and we also worked with public health officials at Somerville College in Oxford, only to realize that there is one big insight that we've all missed, that we shouldn't solve for hunger. In our quest for solving for hunger, we have created a nutrition problem. So if we solve for nutrition, there is a good chance we'll solve for hunger. But if we solve for hunger, we might be creating a nutrition problem.
Explain the difference to us.
Sorry?
Explain the difference between solving for hunger
Right.
and solving for nutrition,
Right.
Because it might not be immediately apparent to a lot of people.
Right. So solving for hunger is pure satiety. That I've got a belly full, I've got a plate full of dense carbs and a saturated meat dish, right? It makes me satiated, but it does very little for my nutrition. In other words, it creates a problem in its wake. It gives me obesity. It gives me hypertension. And we found other sets of data from the NHS where, juvenile coronaries were beginning to happen. The average age was coming down. So we realized that over a period of time, if children are not eating the right kind of food between the age of 6 and 16, they will carry the ill effects of that into their adult years and eventually will then queue up for a state service, which was already getting clogged because the population pyramid is skewed in favor of elderly. So it could become a very big problem, a compounded big problem for the NHS, where a lot of elderly were queuing up for the services they need, and young people in their 40s were queuing up for an intervention which is to do with the GI, gastrointestinal system. So eating food that is apt and appropriate for the context was a big insight for me. And I think that's an insight the world has missed. So we are eating food to satiate purely at an organoleptic level. And Akshaya Patra's mission has been to make tasty food contextually right and exceptionally nutritious. If we can solve for the three together, we would create a better world.
How successful, how many meals did you serve in the UK through Akshaya Patra?
So during COVID, we served a very large number of meals. Like I said, we had a capacity of 3,000 meals. Then we ran into some logistics problems. We ran into challenges to do with, delivery of food and the cost per mile, etc. So I don't remember the number exactly, but we were serving up to 1,000, 1,500 meals per day in one shift. And there were days when we were serving 2,500, 3,000 meals as well.
Amazing. And cumulatively, you would have served how many meals roughly?
I would say probably don't hold me accountable to this, but I think cumulatively that number would be 250,000 meals or thereabouts.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
But then again, this needs to be verified.
That's amazing. It's an incredible story. Bhawani Shekhawat, thanks very much for joining me to talk about the unique experience of Akshaya Patra in the UK. Incredible work. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Hindol. What a pleasure it is to have this conversation with you. Thank you.